Corner with Mary Kim Farkas and Debbie D. Waba. Mary Kim cannot join us today, so I will be flying solo. I apologize. I do not know what's going on with my camera and my microphone, but they are not matching up. But I didn't want to delay the stream any longer because we have a powerhouse guest today, and I cannot wait for her to share her wisdom, and we're just going to have a great conversation. So, I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us what topic we're going to be speaking on today.
Well, thank you, Debbie. Yes, I am Pam McCloskey, also known as Coach Pamsky. And I work with women who are coming out of dysfunctional situations and homes. And I help them to overcome the effects of being in those situations so that they can change the way they live the rest of their life story. And so I am the owner of Pamsky's Place, a life learning center for Christian women. Um, and we focus on the 6 pillars of self care. So we talk a lot about boundaries and trusting again, and how do you overcome imposter syndrome and all those important things that you need when you're trying to personal growth and development. And so today we're going to talk about how to set healthy boundaries in your business and your personal life. So, this is for both. And I'm excited to share with you. And hopefully, it will give you some things that you walk away with and say, I think I can do that.
Well, I love that. And here goes my assistant. Um,
That didn't take long.
no, that did not take long. And because it did not take long, he will probably join us again at some point. But yes, so like boundaries were a hard thing for me, and I love that we're going to have this conversation. And I know that this is one of your favorite topics to talk about. So I'm so excited to dive into this. We've had other guests on, and one of the things that everybody's had in common is all about the boundaries. And it was perfect timing that you were coming on now because we've had the guests that talk about boundaries. And I just love that you are here now to talk about the boundaries so that this way here, people can have a bigger understanding and maybe a greater understanding that boundaries aren't really selfish. They're selfless because we all need them. We all need to have boundaries so that we can be happy and fulfill our own cups, because a lot of times without boundaries we're not filling our cups. We're just going through the motions and not really having anything of our for ourselves, time for ourselves. And by setting those boundaries we can gain all that. But I'm going to let you speak now and talk about boundaries, so this way here people can understand and maybe learn something about boundaries and how it can protect them versus being not something that they're feeling selfish about doing. So
Yes, yes. I think one of the first things that I want to state here is that there's no shame in you not having boundaries. Like, if you're listening to this and you're watching this and you think, "Oh man, I really stink at boundaries," it's okay. It's okay. Don't have shame over that. Most of us don't know how to set boundaries. I know I didn't. When I was going through a time in my life when I realized, hey, things aren't quite working the way I want them to, and there was a lot of chaos in my life, that's when I began to learn that I could reduce that chaos and that stress by having boundaries. And you might think, well, Pam, doesn't that cause more boundaries because you have to step into that? We'll talk about that. But for me, I began to realize that once I started having boundaries, it did help reduce the stress and the chaos. And I actually started feeling joy. And I think that's something that a lot of us are missing in our life, is that sense of joy. And I'm going to say, look, okay, so you haven't been good at setting boundaries. And for me, when someone said boundaries, I'm like, what's that? I didn't even know what boundaries were. So, um, just give yourself some grace. Say, okay, I'm going to learn how to do this and learn more about setting boundaries and start implementing it a little bit at a time, and you'll begin to see a difference. So, one of the places I like to start with boundaries is what is boundaries anyway? What does when I say boundaries, what am I talking about? Well, first, let me tell you what I'm not talking about. I am not talking about you building a wall around you and nobody can get in. That is not a boundary. That is actually you avoiding, you walling yourself off to other people. Instead, what I want you to think about is a fence that's going around you. It's a perimeter. It's saying, this is my space. That is your space. These are my opinions and my thoughts. Those are your opinions and your thoughts. Boundaries actually allows you to have your own opinions, thoughts, feelings, and other people to have theirs. And we don't have to be meshed together. What often happens is that people are too meshed, and it causes that, first of all, it hurts relationships because one person ends up being what we call codependent on the other person, or we get so frustrated and so angry with people that we push them away, and then we want their love because we miss them, and then we pull them back. You see this a lot. And if we could have boundaries, that fence where you can see the other person, where you can um still love them, but not allow them to cause chaos in your life. Maybe you're doing too much for people. Maybe you're not standing your ground when you say something and no one believes you. We're going to talk more about that too. But it's a fence. Think of it as a fence.
And I love that analogy where you can have the fence where you can see them and they can see you, but there is that fence to say, this is my space, this is your space. And I actually love that analogy. So,
Yes.
would you say that a lot of times that people that don't set boundaries, it's because they are people pleasers?
I would say that. I would say a good portion of them are. Sometimes people don't set well, we're gonna go through a couple reasons why people don't set boundaries, but I would say that I'll say it like this: all people pleasers need boundaries. And a good portion of people are people pleasers because and not even in a sense of they're bad, just in a sense that sometimes they care so much that they forget about themselves. Because if you hear me say anything in this whole segment, it is boundaries are for you. They're not for the other person, they're not for anyone else. They're actually for you.
Right. And like I said earlier, it is for you and to protect your space and your sanity and your inner well-being. So I would like for you to go more into now about, why people don't set boundaries and the areas that you're going to talk about. I'd love to hear some of them.
Yeah, some of the reasons why people don't set boundaries is because they're afraid the other person's going to get angry. That is one of the biggest ones. They're afraid other people are going to get angry with them if they set a boundary, and they might be a very heartfelt person. Most people don't like conflict and confrontation. And so they avoid that at all costs. So that's one of the biggest reasons why people don't have boundaries. Sometimes it's because they have a mindset around boundaries, and that mindset needs to change. One of them might be that they feel like maybe they are punishing somebody. I want to say a boundary is never punishing someone, and I highly suggest you do not set boundaries while you're angry. Boundaries need to be set beforehand so that it's already clearly in your mind of what that's going to look like, how you're going to carry it out, and what are you going to do when someone bucks up against your boundary. Those things actually that need to be planned out. So having a planning session is really important. The other thing that people, the reason why they don't set boundaries is because you do have to be consistent. And I'm going to tell you, anytime you're consistent in your life, no matter what it is, you are going to see great fruit from that. And boundaries is no different. You have to be consistent. You can't just set a boundary and then let it go and not do anything with it, because you will have people, if people are used to walking all over you, if people are used to manipulating you, and you put a boundary in place, you think they're going to try to get what they usually get. Absolutely, because they were used to that. And all of a sudden you're doing something different. While they're thinking, I'm just going to keep trying here and wear them down. If you stand your ground with your boundary and not move and keep and be consistent, that other person's going to realize you really mean what you say. Have you ever seen a woman in the store that says, I'm going to spank you? I'm gonna you touch that one more time, I'm gonna spank you. You keep doing that, I'm gonna spank you. But guess what she never does? She never spanks them. She never carries out what she says she's gonna do. Why does that child keep doing what they're doing? Because they know she's not serious. So we have to be serious in being able to set these boundaries and know that it's important. And why is it important? Because you don't want to prevent a crisis, but you also don't want to create a crisis. And you might be thinking, whoa, what do you mean by that? Think of the greatest things that you've learned in your life. Was it because you had to go through some hard stuff? Did something happen that kind of turned you around? You don't want to prevent that for other people. And if you don't set boundaries in place, you might be preventing them hitting rock bottom or hitting that point of a turnaround. But then on the flip side, you don't want to cause chaos either. And sometimes by not setting a boundary, you're allowing chaos to keep going. If you're exhausted, if no one's listening to you, if you keep telling those people in your life or maybe on your team the same thing over and over and over again, I'm going to tell you, you probably don't have a boundary in place. And it's really important.
And I want to touch on the fact that you said there about, sticking to your boundaries. I think when I first started, like really being firm in my boundaries, it was hard for me, especially when it came to my children, because they were used to, Mom, I need a ride now. Now it's, I will give you a ride, but you need to let me know in advance. It's not going to be an instant, let's get up and go. And it was hard for me to break that because I'm usually okay, okay. But now I'm like, no, I'm in the middle of something. So I was not, you didn't ask me prior. So you'll have to wait until I finish what I'm doing. Whereas before I would just drop everything. And now they
Drop
know.
everything
Yeah.
to
And
do.
now they know. So,
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I think that people need to realize is not only is boundaries not a punishment, it is not a way to blame other people. Sometimes people will use boundaries to blame other people, and they are not. And they're not a way to complain. Like, have you ever heard someone just complain and complain and complain? And my question always is, well, what are you doing about it? You may not be able to control somebody else, and that is not what a boundary is either. You're not trying to control someone, but you may not be able to control someone, but you can control yourself and your part in what's happening. And so we need to make sure that we are doing our part. If you're just complaining, you're not a part of the solution. Be a part of the solution. Look at what you actually have the power to do.
yeah.
And It's for you.
Right. And I think that in general, people have to realize when it comes to anything, especially, your mental health and what you're talking about, people have to realize that you can only control yourself. You can't control what's going on around you. You can't control what other people do, how they react. All you can do is control yourself and the way that you react to situations. So we have to stop putting it on other people and realize it's coming from within us.
Absolutely. And one of the things, so where I want to go right now is because you might be thinking, okay, but where do I have boundaries? Like what types of boundaries are there? There's actually, I used to say 7, but now I've done 8 because of the environments that we have now and the age that we're in. Um, I think we need the 8th one. So let's go down through those real quick. The first one is physical boundaries. Ones where you get to tell who's going to be in your space, how close are they going to be to you, can they touch you, um, how much, even for yourself, how much exercising are you going to do, having those boundaries on yourself so that you do accomplish some of the physical goals you have. Then there's emotional, you being allowed to have your own feelings and that your feelings don't have to be somebody else's. And then there's the sexual boundaries. Um, your right to say yes or no to sex, how someone touches you, what way they can touch you, who can touch you, and how intimate you are. Okay. And then there's the spiritual religious boundaries, you being able to practice religion in the way that you feel is good for you. The right to believe what you want to believe. Some people will try to force you to believe things when you actually do have a right to have your own beliefs and your own way of religion. 5 is financial boundaries. How much you spend, where you spend it, having a choice to whether people borrow money from you or not. This is a huge one. We'll probably get into this more later, but grandparents are notorious and parents for giving money when it's more of a manipulation on the child or grandchild. And just to make them happy, they will give them money, but then that child expects it more and more and more. Or they come to them and say, hey, can I borrow $1,000? And then never pay them back. Well, grandma gets mad because she never gets paid back. But then that grandchild comes again, can I borrow another $1,000? Instead of her having a boundary in place, she hands it to them. But then she goes off and she complains that her grandchild just borrowed another $1,000 from her. Yeah. Do I need to say more about that? The 6th one is time boundaries, how you spend your time, how people try to take your time, how you choose to, or even how long you invest your time into something. 7 is mental boundaries. Oh, this is a big one. The right to your own thoughts, the right to your own opinions, your values, and your beliefs. And the 8th one is digital boundaries. How much time you actually spend on your phone? Who's allowed to have access to you through social media? How much time you spend on social media? Those are the 8 boundary types that you can have. My big suggestion here is because that's a lot. And you might look at your life and think, I don't have a boundary in any of those types. It's okay. We all have to start somewhere. And what I'm going to say to you is pick one area, pick one boundary in that area. If you've not been good about allowing other people to have their own opinions, then maybe that's a good place to start. Or if you feel like you're always saying yes to people, then maybe that's a good what I would do is I would start small and build up because you don't want to get overwhelmed. You don't want to feel like, oh, this isn't working or I failed at this. Do something small, watch how it works, and then start to build from there.
And that was actually going to be my question to you is when you decide to start setting boundaries, do you do it all at once or you do it slow and that's, that so you answered that question right there because
I'll, I'll tell a little story. This is a good time for story time
okay.
because this is a good example of this. Okay.
Mhm.
So I have a wonderful husband. And I was just starting to learn boundaries. And I met a new person. My husband became a, I better say this right. My husband became a new person when we moved to Dallas, Texas. And if anyone's been in Dallas, Texas, you know what the driving's like. And my husband is not good with that. Okay. And so he became someone I wasn't used to, and you talk about road rage, he just was a little crazy when he was driving. Finally, one day, we're on our way to none other than a church event, and we're on our way, and he's getting all ticked off at this guy who pulled out in front of him, and he's accelerating and starting to go fast, and this was a miracle for me. I quietly said to him, if you keep driving like this, I'm getting out or you're getting out. And he looked at me like he was shocked. He looked at me and I said, look, you got precious cargo in here because my kids were in the back seat. I said, you got precious cargo in here and we don't have to put up with this. And then I literally bit my tongue, and I'm not kidding. I took my teeth, I bit my tongue, and I shut up the rest of the way because good old Pam used to the whole way. And it's like, no, I said my piece. He calmed down. We got down to where we were supposed to be. He gets out of the car and he hands me the keys. And he said, I think you need to drive until I can get a hold of this. If I would have asked for that, I don't think the outcome would have been as good. But it was my boundary that I didn't have to be in a car with a crazy person just because he's mad because someone cut him off or whatever happened. So yeah, start out small. And that was one of my big ones. Like that was one of my first ones was doing that. And I tell you the feeling it felt good. It felt taking ownership. I felt like I was finally having respect for myself. And that's really what boundaries does is help build respect for you. And
Right.
then other people respect you.
And what I loved about that though is although you set your boundary and you had your standard, you also gave him the power to make the decision. And I think that there's something to be said for that because you were setting your boundary. And in that moment when he handed you the keys, he basically respected your boundary and saw that he was doing something that wasn't that safe. So he didn't lose his power or his manhood or whatever, however you want to put it, his dignity. You gave it in so you presented it in such a way where he was had to think. It forced him to think and it forced him to make a decision that was really obviously for the better, but without insulting him or reprimanding him or making him feel less than. You did it in a very positive, empowering way, and I love that story.
Absolutely. So I know we're not going to get to this, so I want to do it right now because it comes right into this. The goal, think about what the goal is in setting boundaries. The goal is not to control people and make them do what you want. Okay, that's not the goal. The goal is to give the choice to do what they want and make it so painful to do the wrong thing that they want to do the right or they want to do what is the better. For instance, in that situation, the question might have been, well, what if he wouldn't have listened? What if I would have said, stop, let me out, let me and the kids out, or stop, you get out. Well, I can't make him get out, but he would have. But you have people that won't. So what I did was I made it so that he wanted to do the right thing. It's not to control, exactly what you said.
It was empowering for both of you. It empowered you to say this is my boundary, and it empowered him to realize, okay, you know what? She's right.
Yes,
It wasn't criticism, it was a boundary full of empowerment. So I absolutely
absolutely.
love that.
Yes.
So, what else you got for us?
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the questions that maybe you can ask yourself. The one of the things that I want you to think about is there is such a thing as boundaries being too loose and boundaries that are too tight. You can be so tightly wound that you're not actually, we're talking about healthy boundaries. Okay. And so one of them is you can actually, if your boundary is too loose, you can shut the door on people, or too tight, you can shut the door on people where they don't want anything to do with you because you don't have any leadway. You're not giving them it's a control, not an actual boundary. And so, what this might look like, we'll do the tight ones. What might look too tight is that you do shut people out. They don't have a choice, they don't have an option. It can be that you don't talk about your feelings or show emotion at all. It can be that you are self sufficient, don't need anybody. It can be that you don't allow anyone to get physically or emotionally close to you. That is actually, these are, these, you may say these are boundaries, but they're really not. This is really when you're walled off. These are all great examples of being walled off. And then being too loose, if you have boundaries that are too loose, you let anyone touch you, you let anyone manipulate you, you allow people to get too close too fast. See, there is a healthy, I say this all the time when I'm working with women, there is a healthy middle ground. And that's what we're looking for. You don't want to be on one side of the spectrum or the other. You want to be down the middle. But often we don't know what that looks like. So this kind of helps you see that you don't, when you're getting to know someone, you don't want to let them in too fast, but you also don't want to shut them off and not let them in at all. Maybe another one is you say yes way too quick. And this is where I'd like to go, Debbie, because this is something we're in the meat of boundaries now, because the next question usually is, well, what does a boundary look like? Where in my life am I maybe not having boundaries, and how do I start setting them? One of the first things I want to say is that my rule of thumb is, we're going to just start here. If somebody asks you to do something, don't say yes, don't say no, unless you absolutely positively know that you can. And here's why. Because when you're having a conversation with someone and they come up to you and they say, "Hey, Debbie, I really need I need help with something. Can you?" Well, a lot of times our first initial reaction is, "Yes, I can do that." And then we realize, "Oh man, when am I going to have time to do that?" Or, "Oh man, why did I say yes to them? My family's expecting me to." Or, "Oh my goodness, my boss already gave me all of this stuff to do. How am I going to have time to do this?" One of the reasons why we say yes, there's two main reasons why we say yes right away. One is that we have low self worth, and it's the way we get our identity. It's the way that we gather some worth. Because if I do this, they're going to think good of me. They're going to think that I did a great job. And it's just, but maybe you don't really have time for it. Or maybe you haven't really thought it out and you are thirsty for that low self worth to be fed, that you said yes right away. The second reason we say yes is because we don't know how to say no, or we have such kind hearts and we love people that we want to help them. But what tends to happen is that we help either too much or we don't think it out because we can't possibly help everybody. And we're not looking at our priorities and looking at what's important for us in our own life. Because if you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. We all have the same 24 hours. If I say yes to you, but I have 9 other things that I need to do on that same day, one of them's probably gonna end up not happening because I said yes. So my rule of thumb is instead of saying yes, instead of saying no, say, "I will get back to you. I need to think about this. Let me go ask my family and make sure that it's okay with them. I need to pray about it." These are all great answers because what it's gonna cause you to do is pause. And when you say you're gonna get back to them, you do get back to them. You don't just avoid it. You do come back to them. But what you're doing during that pause, whether it's I suggest that you go away from the situation because we are very emotionally driven. And when you're in this situation, you can be very driven to answer or to not take the time you need. So pull yourself out of the situation and assess can I really do this? But here's the other thing that plays into this. You need to ask good questions. Make sure go on a fact finding mission and make sure that you get all of the information that you need before you actually say yes, because there may be pieces that you didn't even know was going to be a part of it. And the more information you have about this task or whatever it is, the better decision you can make, because most of us don't like those kinds of surprises. And so you're able to assess, do I have the time? Do I have the resources? Do I have the information that I need? Am I physically, emotionally, and mentally capable? Once you assess that, then and if you need to go to family members, your husband, your mate, your children, whoever, because they're all affected by what you do too. And once you've made that decision, now you can go back to that person and say, "Hey, I thought this over, I prayed over it, and I'm sorry. As much as I'd really like to do this, I can't right now." See, what we have a hard time with is that part. So rehearse it. Before you ever go to that person, make sure you rehearse it and then go to them, because you will, if you need to, I do strongly suggest you write it down and rehearse it. When you write it down, something happens. Then when you get in front of that person, you're going to feel confident. See, the reason we don't say no is because we don't feel confident. And so if you can feel confident, you can go to them and say, "You know what? I'm sorry." Now there's many ways to say no, but before we get into that, I'm going to hop it back over to Debbie because I know there's probably some things you would like to bring up in this too. So here you go.
Well, absolutely. And you say that about asking a lot of questions, and that is so very important to know the questions. So I'll use this as an example. If somebody asks me, will I come help them paint a room? Okay, I'll ask them, do you have the paint? Do you have the rollers? Do you have the brushes? Do I have to stand on a ladder? Well, if the latter is a yes, I'm like, well, I can help you with the baseboards, but I am not stepping on the ladder. So, while I'm willing to help, I do have my boundaries within helping. And one of the key points that you really brought up, and it kind of just really hit home for me during this, was you say about asking your family. And people don't realize how it can affect your family. And, like there was times that I was going out and I was helping other people, and then my kids would ask me for help. And I was like, well, I can't do that, but you can do it for somebody else. And it really just struck me as, wow, yes, I'm always, and it's taking away from them. So I had to learn to balance the boundaries. And yes, I can help you, but I have to see if it's interfering with anything with my children. So I really loved that point. And again, it just really hit home for me once again, and actually much deeper now. Because it does make sense. You have to ask your family, are we going out, like, okay, you, maybe your family had plans and they're like, but we wanted to go out for lunch, but you said, okay, well, I was going to go help somebody do this, and it didn't align with it. So I do think that not only when we make decisions to help others, we do have to include the ones closest to us to see if there was anything else that we may have missed or may not have thought of. But asking the questions, and then asking the people that matter to see, or not that matter, because to me, all people matter, but asking the people that are important to you and that you may have to, you know, answer to, I guess you could say.
So true, and here's the thing. When we think of low self-worth, most of the time within low self-worth, we don't trust ourselves.
Right.
And if we don't trust ourselves, we certainly aren't gonna trust other people, and yet we're asking other people to trust us. Interesting, right? We don't even trust ourselves. How can other people trust us? The reason I bring this up is if you don't have boundaries, you don't really respect yourself. Because if you respected yourself, you would have boundaries. If you want to start trusting yourself, you need to have boundaries. You ask why? Because when you start having boundaries, you start realizing that those boundaries are for you, and you begin to build trust with yourself because you do what you say you're going to do. You don't do the things you say you're not going to do. And in return, the people out there who we want them to trust us, guess what? We start building trust with them because we start doing what we say we're going to do, exactly what you were saying. We do what we say we're going to do, and we don't do what we say we're not going to do. And that builds trust with other people. I don't think we really think about that when we think of boundaries. We just see, oh, we're so sick of something happening that we need to have a boundary in place. Whoa, whoa, this reaches out way further than that. This is actually about relationships, how people are able to deal with us or work with us, and how we work with ourselves and other people. So we need to look at that. And then one of the things that I really want to make clear here is, and this is something that I think people need to say to themselves, write it down, have it where you can see it. And it is, you can't set a boundary and take care of someone else's feelings at the same time.
Right.
Ooh, you cannot set a boundary and take care of someone else's feelings at the same time. Your boundary, though, and this is hard for empaths and people who are very heartfelt and very emotionally driven, you cannot care about what someone else is feeling when you're setting a boundary. And that might rub you a little raw, and it's okay. It will in the beginning. Who do you need to take care of first? It does not mean you're being heartless or selfish. If you, and this is why Pansky's Place is all about self care, because if you're not, you know it. We say it all the time. When you are in an airplane, what do they say? You got to put that mask on yourself first. Give yourself the oxygen and then the person beside you. Why? Because if you pass out, guess what? You can't help the person beside you. The same in life. If you don't have boundaries for yourself and take care of your own feelings, you can't care for other people's. So that's why a boundary is not necessarily caring for the other person's feelings because they might get angry. They're used to doing things to you, they're used to you being a certain way, and all of a sudden you're changing. They may not like it, but it is okay. And that's why you need to write this down so that you understand that in time, they'll either respect you for your boundary or they'll go away. That might scare you a little bit, but I'm going to tell you some people that go away need to go away.
Right.
They need to go away because all you're good for them is to manipulate you, to suck from you, to be able to get as much from you as they can. And then when they suck you dry, they go to the next person. You have way more value than that. You weren't created for people to walk all over you. And you were created to be able to be who you were created to be. And
Yes.
that means you're gonna have to have boundaries. So the next time you hear yourself complain, Pamsky's gonna say, and I want you to hear my voice in your head, what am I doing? What's my part in making that stop? Have I done what I can do?
Right.
And if the answer is no, then you need to start putting boundaries in place.
Yeah, and I think, humans in general, we don't like change.
Mm-mm.
So when someone starts to change and put up these boundaries, it's like, whoa, what's going on? People don't adapt to change in general very well. So when you start giving them these boundaries, they're like, their world is tossed up in the air and like, where am I landing? And sometimes they'll land in a better place, but again, that's on them. It's not on you. You have to be happy with be happy with the boundaries that you're setting and know that it's fulfilling you.
Yes. Yes.
It's not for the other person, it's for you.
And it does mean you're gonna have to get out of your comfort zone, and I know that doesn't feel good. I totally get it. Totally get it. It doesn't feel good to get out of your comfort zone, but do you like where you are? If you don't like what's going on around you, then you're gonna have to get out of your comfort zone. Take that PP little step and get out. But here's the thing, grab someone to help you. You don't have to do this by yourself. You've got coaches like me, you've got coaches like Debbie, you've got people who can help you. Reach out and say, hey, in these certain areas of my life is chaos. And I want to make a change. I just don't know where to start. I don't know how to set these boundaries. Can you help me? And I'm gonna be like, yes, let's do it. Let's do it. Here's some of what I want you to think about, just some hints about setting boundaries. Okay. I have a whole course on this. You can go to my website and you can get the course and go through it because there's lots of things we're not going to be able to talk about today because there's just so much around this, like consequences and what are some of the deeper steps we need to take and what do we do when people buck up against our boundaries, all and more deeper on the mindset. But for now, what I want you to think about are these few tips that can help you out. One is that when you're setting a boundary, you need to do it clearly. Remember, you need to plan. Okay. You got the planning part done. That's a coach is really good at doing that with you. You got the planning part done. Now it's what do you do next? Well, next, you need to be very clear with your boundaries. You need to announce it to the person, not in anger, not when emotions are high, but when you can sit down and treat that person like another human being and be able to be very clear about what your boundary is. You may have a time frame and a consequence. Now, I will say this, a little hint on consequences. There's natural consequences that just naturally happen. You put your hand on a hot skillet, the natural consequence is what? You're going to get burnt, right? So there are natural consequences, and then there are consequences that you actually put in place so that they know, again, not a punishment, but they know that you're serious. Okay. It's just naturally, this is something that's going to happen if you don't, if you decide you're giving them the choice, but if they decide to do what they want, then this is what's going to happen. Okay. So you have to be clear. You don't do it in anger. Don't do it when you're expressing your boundaries, do it with the least words that you can. You might ask why, because you can talk yourself right out of a boundary. You
That
can.
that
You
is true.
can. Yes. And so if you tell yourself, and remember, you're going to practice this before you ever go to it, but do it with as least words as you can so that you don't talk yourself out of it. Do not justify your boundary. Do not apologize for your boundary and don't rationalize it. It's another reason why you don't want to use a whole lot of words because you'll start apologizing for you. You do not need to apologize for a boundary. Okay. Um, don't argue. If you are starting to state your boundary and the other person is getting angry and they're arguing with you and those emotions start to get high, the voices start to get high, stop. Stop. Say, hold on a minute. I love you and I want to have a healthy relationship with you. And this is getting heated and this is going in a place I really don't want it to go. So let's take a break.
Mhm.
Let's come back in a half hour, whatever you think is, people better than we would in your life. You decide how long that break needs to take, but make sure that you tell them we're coming back. We're coming back to talk about this. Why? Because some people have abandonment issues. And when you start you got to announce that you're stopping now. Don't just walk away because people with abandonment issues will chase you down and they will try to get in front of that door and they will try to stop you. But if you say, look, this is getting heated, we need to take a break. We are coming back to this. I love you. We're coming back to this conversation. Then they know that you are. But please make sure you do. Like, don't let too much time go by. And then just set the boundary calmly, firmly, clearly, and respectfully. You really can do that. This does not have to be a hard thing. It doesn't have to be difficult. And most people will respect you when you can do it in a calm. It was so funny. I was in a conversation the other day. I forget what it was, but I remember the comment later. I was in a conversation. The other person was getting louder and louder and louder. And the bystanders were listening to this conversation. And one of them came to me afterwards and said, I was just so impressed how you stayed calm. Let me tell you something. Inside, I was not calm. I was not calm. But on the outside, I was because I knew that if I got angry with them and my voice raised with them, it was just going to be an ugly battle. And that wasn't going to solve anything. So I did stay calm. And now I will tell you, after that conversation was over, I went into my bathroom and I just sat for a little bit and reassessed and talked to myself because inside I could feel it. I was like, whew. And so I just breathed and, got myself back, and I come back out, and they were none the wiser. They had no idea. And by me staying calm, it actually diffused them and they came back down. But yes, just know that you can stay calm and have that respect for somebody else. And most people will have respect for you in return.
Well, I love all that, and I love your tips. And as we wind this down, do you have any last closing thoughts?
I want to say you are worth it. You deserve to have the best life possible. And you have way more power in that than what you think. And when I say power, it's not, again, controlling everybody. It's that you being able to decide what is really good for you and what can you do. So make sure you have your priorities listed out. And I always say have your 5 core values, because your 5 core values helps you with um your priorities, it helps with your direction in life. It'll help you with your boundaries. This is how you know when you need to have boundaries in place, is if people aren't honoring your core values. But how does that happen if you don't even know what your core values are? So I would start there. I would say, grab somebody and say, look, I need help. My life is chaotic and I need peace, and they'll be able to help start sorting out where you can start doing that at.
And I love that. And thank you
Mhm.
so much. This has been a great conversation about boundaries. My name again is Debbie D. Waba, and you can find me everywhere on social media under Debbie D. Waba. And Pam, I'd love for you to share where the audience may be able to find you.
My website is pam-mccloskey.com. But if you look up Pamsky, you're going to find me on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. Just go because I'm in all of them. And if you look up Pamsky, you'll find me.
And I love, love, love that. So I want to thank you today for being our guest. And I'm sorry that Mary Kim couldn't make it today. She was
Yes, we missed her.
really looking forward to this
Mhm.
conversation, but she can be found on all social media as Mary Kim Farkas. And if there's any topics that you guys want to hear from us or you want to be a guest, please reach out to either Mary Kim or myself, and we will come up with the plan and get you on here. But for today, we're going to sign off and say goodbye. And thank you all for joining us. We'll go back and look at the comments and answer and respond. But everybody, have a great, great day. And thank you, thank you.